Shall we do 7852, which is the new film by the director of People vs. George Lucas and Dock of the Dead? The title, it's a film about the Psycho shower sequence, and the title refers to the number of setups and number of cuts in the Psycho shower scene. And it's essentially a series of talking heads filmed against green screen so they can be digitally inserted into a motel setting. And the interviewees speak directly to the camera. You know, Errol Morris had that thing, the Interatron, whereby...
No.
We've talked about it here before, whereby by using a teleprompter, he puts his face in the camera so that when you look at it, you'd think you're talking to him, but you're talking, okay, fine. So they use that. Interviews include Marty Renfro, who's the body double for Janet Leigh, Jamie Lee Curtis, Guillermo del Toro, of course, we talked about with Pacific Rim, Eli Roth, who has nothing of interest to say. And then sitting on a sofa together, Elijah Wood, Daniel Noah, and Josh Walter, Spectrovision partners, who sort of sit there and do like the academic version of Beavis and Butthead watch the Psycho shower scene. Here's a clip.
It's so ingrained in pop culture to where
Yeah.
it is transcendent.
My 7-year-old daughter knows that, but she doesn't know what it comes from. But you know, she's made that joke. Hey. Like, I don't know where she got it.
That's incredible.
She has no idea it's from Psycho. It's evolutionary. Like, we're just born knowing the shower scene from Psycho.
I mean, it's a weird thing with this documentary. Essentially, it's the whole documentary is people talking about the shower scene, why it's important, what it does, how it does, what it does. And it's a fairly extraordinary collection of talking heads. We get people like... Richard Stanley turns up, actually. Richard Stanley, who I haven't seen interviewed in a documentary for a very long time, who made Dust Devil and started making The Island of Dr. Moreau before Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando went and made it.
You love that film.
Anyway, and it turns out quite near the end that Richard Stanley is there largely because there's a scene in Hardware, which was his first feature, that is a shower scene. I was thinking, I mean, I like Richard, and I just couldn't figure out what is it. Oh, yes, fine, that's why it is. And it's interesting because the Psycho shower scene is essentially cinema 101. It's the thing, you know, it's the thing that you go to look at, to study cinema, because it's so extraordinarily put together. And you think, like in recent years, we've had Hitchcock with Sir Anthony Hitchcock, you know, talking about Psycho. We've
Sir
had
Anthony Hitchcock.
with Sir Anthony doing Hitchcock.
Yes.
We've had The Girl with Toby Jones, who's coming on the show next week to talk about Kaleidoscope. We had Hitchcock Truffaut, which was based on the original recordings for the book. You know, there's been a lot of stuff about Hitchcock. There was a first documentary I ever did for Channel 4 back in 1980 or something, Fear in the Dark. We were talking about the evolution of horror movies, big section in it about the Psycho shower scene, in which we talked to Saul Bass. And Saul Bass, who was the guy who did all the storyboards for it, and you know, essentially to some extent had a very big hand in the way in which it was constructed. And actually, we ended up just using Saul Bass's storyboards, not using stuff from the shower scene itself, because we kind of felt that everyone's seen that so much, we didn't want to just repeat all of that. And later on, I made another documentary called Scream and Scream Again, in which, again, everybody, so that was about the slasher movie, and everybody goes back to the Psycho shower scene. And we end up talking to Joe Stefano, who was the screenwriter, and Robert Bloch, I think we spoke to originally for Fear in the Dark. And so basically, there's a thing in the notes that says that what the film is an unprecedented look at the Psycho shower scene. I think the one thing you'd have to say is it's not unprecedented, it's precedented, okay? There has been a lot of discussion about the Psycho shower scene, almost more than the Battleship Potemkin steps. It's hard to think of a scene in cinema that's more thoroughly worked over. There was a Douglas Gordon installation in the early 90s called 24 Hour Psycho, which took the film and slowed it down to 2 frames a second so that when you played it, the whole film played out over 24 hours. And a lot of art critics went along and said, you know, it's amazing, you know, you sit there and you watch it.
Sounds boring.
Well, it bothered me because it was kind of like everyone's going, yeah, it's incredible. You look at it and you see the artistry. It's Psycho. We didn't need to slow it down. It's Psycho. Everybody knows it's Psycho. It's the Psycho. You know, people say, "Go, you look at the shower scene. Then when you see it that slowly, you see all the characters."
What do you see? What do you see?
You see, it's Psycho. It's one of the most classically well constructed. You know, William Friedkin said it's a film which wrests you to the ground. As Guillermo del Toro said, it's like a steel trap. Then, of course, there was the Gus Van Sant shot-for-shot remake, which took Psycho and remade it shot-for-shot and somehow managed to make it terrible. So it's a lot of things, but unprecedented isn't one of them. It's precedented. I think that talking about the way in which a film is constructed and the way in which, you know, you can start to look at how a director is singing. Well, there's a lot of stuff about, you know, the way in which it was it represented voyeurism, the way in which it changed boundaries of mainstream cinema, the way in which the use of black and white as opposed to colour was important, its place within film history, although there are certain notable exceptions that it kind of specifically leaves out. I mean, for me, I don't think there was a lot in it that I didn't know from before. It was nice to hear those stories again. It was kind of entertaining. It didn't have that absolute coal-face feeling that you got from the Truffaut conversation with Hitchcock, which was kind of, which was extraordinary. But it did just sort of, it reminded you of the thing is there's a reason why everyone goes back to that scene. There's a reason why everyone goes back to Psycho, and there's a reason why everyone goes back to that scene, because it kind of becomes a primal moment. And I think that people can pick over it, infinitely. There are some things that people say, this film did this and it changed it, and I think I'm not entirely sure that that's correct, but I will still, I'll still happily listen to them. The one thing it didn't quite have is there's a documentary about The Shining, which incidentally was back in cinemas last week for Halloween, and it's called Room 237, in which a bunch of academics watch The Shining and read all these kind of incredible theories into it, most of which are total baloney, but are kind of quite entertaining baloney. And there was something weirdly hypnotic about that. And this didn't quite have that for me. But if you're interested in cinema and you're interested in the artistry of cinema, it's a pretty good primer.
What's it called again?
It's called 7852.